Hi, good afternoon. This is lovely St. Amy.
That's strange. How do you know that?
Well, I find it strange because I was just given this assignment this morning. Who are you?
The mysterious caller, who somehow already knew about my assignment, asked that while I was looking into this story, that I consider the rich ecological and biodiversity of the areas stated to be developed into golf courses and exclusive resorts, and encouraged me to look into the real facts behind the story. She challenged me to develop an honest assessment and present to the public what the real long-term impacts of these developments would be on our fragile ecosystem and our natural and cultural heritage.
But I will say, you do make some very interesting points. You've definitely sparked my interest here. Yes, well, that's what I do. That's my job, to look into things. Yes, I think this is worth looking into. All right then. Goodbye.
No one would ever call me a tree hugger. However, one would have to have their head in the sand not to be aware of all the news about global warming, climate change, and especially how these issues will affect island nations. I decided right then that I needed to look into the ecological side of these planned developments. And so I got on the phone to Frank to get his approval to revise my assignment.
Hey Frank, it's your star reporter here. Yeah, I'm doing okay. I was actually doing the research on the golf course developments and of course looking into how they might boost tourism arrivals on St. Lucia. But I got this really strange call from this woman who identified herself just as an environmentally concerned citizen. She was talking about the fact that, these developments could be potentially devastating for our ecological environment. Yes, and she was talking about the fact that we sell St. Lucia as a desired destination based on the scenic natural beauty. However, these developments might have a very negative impact on that. So Frank, I'm thinking, rather than taking this story from the angle of, boosting tourism arrivals, maybe we can do something different. How about looking at it from an environmental angle?
At first, Frank was a bit reluctant.
Yes, Frank.
But he has grown to trust my instincts and decided to let me move forward.
All right, great, excellent. Thanks, boss. Yes, you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again. Don't worry, I always make you proud. All right then, goodbye.
I immediately switched gears and began investigating this as an eco story. So, I began making calls, and I spent the next few days on the phone and searching the internet and looking deep into the issue. As I went along, I became more and more concerned. I finally reached the Deputy Chief Forestry Officer to get his input on the situation.
Hello?
My name is Lovely St. Amy, and I'm an investigative reporter.
Oh, I was expecting your call this morning. What's up?
I'm currently working on a story that I feel is crucial, and it deals with the disturbing trends in development and the rapid loss of natural habitat and ecosystems here in St. Lucia. Well, through my research, I have become aware of the area that the St. Lucia National Trust refers to as Iyanola, or the Northeastern Coastal Corridor.
Yeah, this northeast coast is critical.
Well, I'd like to get some information from you as the Deputy Chief Forestry Officer regarding this area.
Okay, when it comes to the northeast coast, as far as the department is concerned, that is a very important biodiversity rich area. We know that it's been cut off from the general development push for a while. We've got this intact tropical dry forest. You have from pretty much from the Cape State region all the way down to Fordo. But it's got a lot of vital species in there, endemic species. But I mean, it's rich for other reasons as well, and this extends all the way down to the coast.
He went on to say that the area is among the most biologically diverse dry woodland areas, and that this area contains more rare species of plants and animals than anywhere else in the Eastern Caribbean.
The developments or whatever that's planned for this area has to be sensitive because of that very rich biodiversity which occurs there, and it's an important part of St. Lucia. It's a part of our heritage that we need to be concerned about, and we need to treasure.
Thank you so much, Mr. John.
After my call, I decided it was time to get out there and see some of these areas for myself. My first destination was Louvet Estate, where I had previously arranged to meet up with Matthew Morton, an iguana expert, working here in association with the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust.
Hi,
Good lovely.
morning. Yes.
I'm Matt. Pleased to meet you.
Matt, nice to meet you.
Okay, all of this land around here that we can see now, you find iguanas in. We're headed towards Louvet Estate, which is a little bit further down towards the coast. And at the moment we're going through an area of banana gardens and other cultivation. And in the wooded areas of this, the woodland, iguanas are living. And at nesting time they'll migrate from these areas down to the beach at Louvet to lay their eggs. Some of them will come from as far away as 3 kilometres just to get to the beach to lay their eggs. And these are animals that normally in their week-to-week life might only move a few hundred yards each week. But then just once a year they'll move 3 kilometres just to get to a nest site. So the issue really isn't keeping people out of this area, but it's just regulating how they use it, making sure that people are taking care of the biodiversity that's here. And as it happens, this road is helping to do that because it just makes it difficult for large numbers of people to get down here.
Interesting.
We head through here.
Wow, I can hear the ocean.
And you can really see how
And I
secluded.
can't see any. Wow, you really weren't kidding. There is absolutely no development.
I mean, what we're looking at now is really the core of Iyanola. It stretches down to the south to Fondor in that direction, and it stretches north to Grandance and beyond Dauphin in that direction. And iguanas are coming in from a very wide area. Some of them are coming from as far as Fondor just to get to this beach. They may be migrating for weeks on end, coming maybe 3 kilometres
Right.
just to get here. Well, when we get down there, you'll see it provides some ideal nesting opportunities for iguanas. It's got just the right conditions that they're looking for to lay their eggs. It's also used by turtles, and iguanas and turtles in some ways are quite similar. They spend most of their lives in a different habitat to where they lay their eggs. So the turtles are out at sea, obviously, most of their lives. The iguanas are back here in all this dry forest. Both of them need to come to sandy, well-drained, hot areas to lay their eggs. The turtles actually migrate through the sea, come up onto the beach. The iguanas, which are spending most of their lives in treetops, come down onto the ground, down to the beach, and they're using the same areas to lay their eggs. So it's a very special habitat, this beach. Where we're standing here is in dry forest, which to a lot of people is just called bush. In St. Lucia, they've done a fantastic education job on how important the rainforest is, and it is really important. It supports the parrots and lots of other biodiversity. But this so-called bush is an equally important habitat in its own right. It supports just as much biodiversity as the rainforest, in fact, and it's a different richness of species here in the dry forest compared to the rainforest. So for St Lucia to preserve all of its biodiversity, it needs to protect not just rainforest, but also some of the dry forest as well. And this area here, as you look around, there's almost no buildings. This is the nearest thing to wilderness.
Not almost no buildings, there are no buildings.
Well, there's actually one or two down there.
Okay, well, from where I'm standing, I can't see any.
There are a few people in here.
Okay.
But it's the nearest thing to wilderness St Lucia has got, really, outside of the rainforest. And it is fantastically important for wildlife. And it's easy, when you think about the rainforest, to lose sight of these other habitats, which are just as important and really do need a lot more conservation attention.
That's what I love about this project. I'm learning so much. I'll never look at the bush the same way again.
Okay, this is the students' camp. It looks like they're out of work at the moment. If we go up to the headland here, we can get a good view of both beaches, and then we'll see if we can find the students.
Sounds good. As a bonus on my trip to Louvet, I got to meet some students who were there and just setting up for some new research work on a study of the iguana's nesting habitats, and hoping to get some idea as to how many iguanas might remain in the area.
This is Seiko. He's been
How are
working
you?
with me for about
Hi.
8 years now.
Good.
Nice to meet you.
Same to you.
Okay.
Seiko probably knows more about iguanas than anyone I've met on St Lucia. He's the real iguana expert.
Wow. All right, so tell me a bit about what's going on here and what you guys are doing.
Okay, basically this is so we can catch the hatchlings. Which
Their plan was to catch the hatchlings as they emerge from the nest, measure them, count them, take a DNA sample, and then release them back into the wild. Now tell me a bit about how you identify a nesting area.
Well, what we found is that year after year iguanas come to the same places. We originally found those places partly from expert local knowledge. Seiko, he knew some of the places where iguanas were coming just through years of observation, and partly because iguanas leave behind signs. I mean, this, for example, is an eggshell, and each year when iguanas dig a nest, they dig out the old nests, and the eggs each year hatch underground. So there's a lot of eggshells underground, and they throw those out. So in nesting areas, you look around and you can see a number of these eggshells. There's another one over there. I mean, they're scattered around. So that gives us a clue that iguanas are nesting here. And then we look for the holes, we look for the tail marks the adult iguanas make. And what Jenny and Hayden are looking at is why are iguanas choosing some areas and not others to nest in?
After that, we left the students and we were getting ready to head back. But good luck was on our side that day, for we found Chris Pilgrim, and I had a chance to talk with him about his views as a stakeholder, a realtor, and as it turned out, a devout nature lover.
If you take the whole East Coast, which traditionally has been left alone, left out of tourism, you'll see that from Donkey Beach coming all the way down here, it's slated for development, whether it's golf course, hotel, and most of the development is what an architect friend of mine calls the moron developments, which is the more you can put on a property, the better. And I think if you look at some of the successful products like Tikai, for instance, which is just a small cottage development on a ridge side, not back in the beach, not interfering with too much, highly successful. I think what we have in the Caribbean, what people want and what they're coming for, we're giving it up, we're selling it out. This project here, if ever you see the plans, and it's hard to see the plans, they plan on taming the beach. I mean, it's, putting breakwater out there to tame the beach, to make it calm, so that people could come here. That will change the whole thing. Matthew, as you know, is involved with the iguanas and stuff, and how that is going to be affected, I would really like to know. But we don't really have access to the plans, and we don't really know. I think the rate of development and the amount of golf courses we have, I don't think my daughter is going to have this kind of wildness and this kind of remoteness in just a few years.
Why do you think it exists that you're going to have a development in such a treasure, in such a natural habitat, and yet no thought is going to be given to how to preserve it and how to maintain its natural value? Why does that still persist?
I don't know. I think that the marketing people think that nature is a golf course. I think left to them, they might just take all the wildlife and get a taxidermist and stuff an iguana here and a bird there, and they could sell that product. I don't know why, but I tend to disagree. I tend to think that people come for what we have.
What would it take? What do you think it needs to take in St. Lucia to realize that?
Awareness. I think an education program of any type where people know what they are giving up, right? And you can make comparisons. You can.
That's true, because strangely, I've never been here before. This is my first time.
Yeah.
I guess it's very difficult to get emotionally attached to something that you don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then after the fact, you never knew what was there before. You don't have a comparison. Everything just seems good. I've been to Esperance, for instance, right now, as of last year. I mean, they just mowed down the mangrove that was there, pushed stuff out on the reef that was there, and it will look good at the end of the day. But when you knew what was there, like I know what was there because I go there often, it's you feel a loss, right? So if we can document it at this time and show people what they're losing, make people understand. Even the communities around, make them understand what the demands are of a golf course, water demands, right? So how does it impact on their lives? You know, things like that.
I had been using the work of Christopher Cox throughout my research phase and felt what better way to round out the research than by meeting him in person. We agreed to meet at the most special place, Grand Anne's Beach, on what was a perfect and beautiful day. Hi.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
All right, so I'm wrapping up the final phase of my research, and I thought, what better place to do it than right here at Grand Anne's Beach? It's absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful parts of St. Lucia as far as I'm concerned.
I found that during my research phase, that there's this divide. There's a them, and then there's us.
The tree
And I
huggers
remember
camp,
that you were saying over the phone, you know, people tend to think, okay, the tree huggers are blowing everything out of proportion.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
How do we get into changing that mindset?
Well, I mean, the thing is, we often find ourselves, you know, when we have those sort of, like we do meetings, you know, we have consultations and so on, and you often find us preaching to the converted, you know. If we're talking about, look, conserving the environment or doing things that are not going to have such a detrimental impact, people do in fact say, well, look, why are you making such a big thing about it? You know, it's only a few trees, a few birds, the birds will come back and all that kind of thing, you know. But what they don't realize, every little piece that you take out, every little piece over time accumulates, you know. And it's not to say that we can't develop the place. I mean, we know we need jobs and everything like this. But what we're trying to say is do it more responsible. But we cannot ourselves, the people who are seen to be, okay, the green people or the tree huggers or the environmentalists, it just can't be us. That's the message I think you should be bringing out. And that's certainly what, I mean, for me anyway, that's what my career is all about. Trying to get people to buy into that philosophy of conservation and doing things the right way.
Great, so why don't we take a walk down the beach and we'll talk some more?
Sure, let's do it.
So I have to admit that I am a little embarrassed that before I started doing this research, well, before I got that mysterious phone call, I told you a bit about that phone call.
Yep.
That phone call from that mysterious person who told me, you know, why not look at it from this angle? Before that, I wasn't really aware of our rich natural heritage and why we should protect it. So now I want to take what I've learned throughout the course of this research and feed some of that to St. Lucians.
In most of what we try to do, you know, in terms of the kind of, like the professionals in the environment field, you know, we often look at the landscape of St. Lucia as a group of what we call watersheds, you know. And a watershed simply is a piece of land that is drained by a river. So for example, you have this river flowing past here. All the areas that drain into this river, the pieces of landscape that drains into this river, could be considered as part of the watershed. All right, so in other words, if you look back up to the ridge, where you have the Debarak community that sits on top of a ridge, when it rains, all the water that falls on this side towards the Atlantic, to the ocean, that is all part of what we can call maybe the Grand Anse watershed. All right, so you're talking in the watershed, you have certain types of soils, you have certain type of plants, certain types of animals, and so on. And depending on how isolated the place may be, or the impact mankind may have, you will find that the amount of species we have here, in terms of both plants and animals, may be abundant or may be very limited. It so happens that in this area, because of the fact that it was relatively undisturbed for quite a long time, except for the agricultural activities they had in the flat many years ago, this place has retained its ecological richness. Okay, so it means that it has retained a very, very special character in St. Lucia. You will find that kind of characteristic in the rainforest, for example, where it's so mountainous, people can't really access it, and it's remained forested. That's why you find a parrot there, you find a number of birds, you find a number of plants that are found in the forest. And in fact, not only in the St. Lucia, in the central rainforest, but even areas like around here, you find certain animals and plants that you will not find anywhere else on the island, nowhere else in the Caribbean, and in some cases nowhere else on the planet.
Now, some people tend to think that when you start speaking about the environment and preserving the environment, that it's trees, trees, trees,
Yeah.
animals, animals, animals. What about us? You need to bring in the development.
Of course, but that's.
But you're not anti-development.
No, of course not, because I mean, if we were anti-development, the luxuries you and I enjoy or the conveniences could not happen. You know, so that argument doesn't make any sense. But we have seen in countries around the world the impacts of unplanned, unregulated development and what has had to communities. All right? I mean, you go to certain places in the Caribbean where communities once used to rely on certain reefs, for example, to fish. Okay? And they would tell you very clearly, when my grandfather was so and so, when my father used to do that, they used to have so many fishes there. You talk to people who live here in St. Lucia, they'll tell you, and you must have heard this, how they used to dive into a river. They used to stay on a bridge and they used to dive into a river, do a head shoot into a river. That river would be like 10, 15 feet deep. You go there today, how much water is inside there? That can tell you enough about, you know, the kind of impacts we've had. We cannot say we cannot have development, okay? What we're saying is that we have a very, very tiny piece of landscape, very, very small. We do not have the luxury of having big landscapes where we can go and mine in a place or cut down all the trees in a place and it would not necessarily impact the local communities. We have communities intermingled with ecosystems, with trees and coral reefs and forests and everything. You see, so it makes the job of management very difficult. It makes it a very complicated task. So my colleagues who work in the ministry, who every day have to be looking at developmental plans, it's a very hard sell for them to try to convince, you know, say developers as to why we need to do this. And I'm not saying all developers do not take this into consideration, you know, but the point about it is that it's a hard sell, and I don't think people think clearly enough about it. If it doesn't impact them in a very direct way, they tend not to think about it too clearly. It's only when we have a big flood, for example, the place floods out, we say, hey, how that's happening? You know, or there's a big landslide that buries a community. And that's when you wake up and you start saying, well, hey, something has gone wrong here. Before, a lot of people don't see it unless it really affects them, you know. And again, a place like Grand Anse and the northeastern area, because it's so far removed from, you know, our Castries or Vieux Fort Soufrière, it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So we need to make sure that, you know, this kind of environment we have and this gem, if you will, I like to call it, you know, is something that people think about as well.
Yes, that we bring into light.
Yeah, and it's just not when you look here, it's a remote bushland, you know. So that's the message I think you need to send. So, yeah. I wish you luck, of course.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Frank. Lovely here. So, I've wrapped up the research phase of the project. Yes, I wrapped up yesterday in Grand Dance with Chris Cox. I tell you, I was amazed by how beautiful and tranquil it is down there. Yes. And I'm a bit embarrassed because, you know, I've never known of these places. And I've learned so much about the fragile ecosystem. And I must say it is rather sad how much of it has already been lost. And I know that development will come, but we need to realize that it must be done in such a way that we still remain mindful of our environment. They can coexist, and it's time for St. Lucians to stop acting like they cannot, because they can. Frank, when I was doing the research, I came across this anonymous quote, which I think sums it all up beautifully. And it said, "The earth is not a gift from our parents, but borrowed from our children." I think that says it all.